Dust swirled through the streets of Blackwater Flats, kicking up the dry scent of dirt and sun-baked timber. A young woman sprinted between the wooden buildings, her skirts tangling at her knees, boots slapping against the weathered planks. Behind her, masked figures moved like shadows, their rifles catching the harsh sunlight as they closed the distance with a relentless rhythm. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes wide and desperate, and for a moment, her breath caught in a sharp, staccato gasp. A man leaned against the edge of a doorway, his hat low over his eyes, the brim shadowing a face weathered by sun, wind, and too many fights. Silas Crow moved with a slow, deliberate grace, hand resting near the butt of his revolver, but he didn't move to confront the gunman yet. He watched her first. Not the pursuit. Not the chaos. Just her. The way her shoulders hunched, the way her fingers trembled as if gripping some invisible anchor. The young woman darted through the market square, knocking over a crate of apples. The sound of rolling fruit and shattered wood made her stumble, and a rifle cracked from the distance, sending a splintering echo through the empty streets. She froze for a heartbeat, heart hammering, before Silas stepped into the open. Without a word, he moved, fast but calm. In a single motion, he stepped between her and the nearest gunman. The masked figure raised his weapon, surprise flickering in the tilt of his head, but Silas's revolver was quicker. A shot rang out, low and precise. The gunman dropped, sprawling into the dust, and the other three faltered, unsure. "You shouldn't have come here alone," Silas said, his voice steady, carrying over the wind. "I had no choice," she gasped, bending forward, hands on her knees as she tried to catch her breath. Her eyes flicked up at him, full of fear and something else, urgency, maybe, or pleading. Silas didn't answer. He glanced down the street, noting the others regrouping, their masked heads disappearing around corners, trying to predict her path. He didn't chase them. Not yet. His attention returned to the girl, assessing her not by her beauty or her fright, but by the way she held herself even in panic. There was a fire there. Survival instinct. And he knew, without her telling him, that she would do anything to get away from them. She staggered toward him, voice trembling. "Please, you have to help me." Silas studied her. No one had run like this through Blackwater Flats in years without reason. The town had its share of scoundrels, thieves, and desperados, but something about her told him this wasn't a petty chase. Not a debt. Not a grudge. This was something deeper. Dangerous. The wind carried the faint scrape of boots over wood as one of the masked men reappeared at the far end of the street. Silas stepped closer to her, hand resting lightly on her arm, a subtle shield. "Come with me. Move fast and keep low. Don't ask questions." She nodded, swallowing fear and disbelief. Her lips trembled, but she obeyed, following his lead into a narrow alley. The shadows here were long and thin, stretching across the dusty boards and leaning walls like fingers reaching for them. The sound of the gunman's distant shouts echoed faintly, but Silas's measured steps never faltered. At the end of the alley, a small, weathered cabin sat just beyond the edge of town. Silas pushed the door open, motioning her inside. Dust motes floated in the sunlight slicing through the cracked window, and the faint scent of wood smoke lingered in the air. She paused, taking in a modest space, a room barely furnished but safe. Her chest heaved, and for a brief moment, her eyes filled with something unspoken, relief, and perhaps suspicion. "You're safe here," Silas said. "For now." Her gaze met his, silent but searching, as if asking a question she couldn't speak aloud. Outside, the wind carried a whisper through the trees lining the outskirts. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of sight, the danger had not yet stopped moving. It waited. Watching. Patient. And in that moment, Silas realized that saving her might not be as simple as offering shelter. Whatever she carried, whatever had brought masked men to chase her through the streets of Blackwater Flats, it would not stay hidden for long. Lydia sank onto the wooden chair in Silas's cabin, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if holding herself together. Dust from the wind outside clung to her hair, streaking it with grit, and the sweat on her brow glimmered in the slanting sunlight. She avoided his eyes, her fingers fidgeting with the torn hem of her skirt. Silas moved around the room with quiet purpose, checking the locks on the door and the windows. He didn't speak much, he rarely did. But each movement told its own story: caution, readiness, calculation. Finally, he stopped near the hearth and leaned against the mantel, eyes fixed on her. "You said you're just running from debt collectors," he said, voice calm but edged with doubt. "Is that the whole story?" Lydia shook her head quickly, almost instinctively. "Yes, no. I mean, they're dangerous." "But," she faltered, biting her lip. "It's complicated." Silas didn't press. He knew better than to push someone cornered. Instead, he studied her from across the room. The way her shoulders tensed, the way her eyes darted toward the window, even when it was quiet. Something more than fear clung to her. Something that wouldn't be spoken lightly. Outside, the wind shifted. Shadows moved across the cabin walls, thin lines tracing the cracks in the wood. Silas caught sight of a figure at the edge of the clearing beyond the trees, a shadowy observer, frozen in place, just beyond the brush. The figure didn't move, didn't step closer, but the awareness of being watched pressed in on them both. "Someone's out there," Silas said quietly, nodding toward the window. "Watching." Lydia's fingers tightened around the table. They'll find me." Her voice wavered, low but urgent. "Even here?" Silas nodded. "Then we'll make sure they don't. Not while you're under my roof." She looked up at him then, eyes wide and searching. Fear mingled with an unspoken question: why him? Why had he stepped between her and certain death in the street? And yet, even as she wanted answers, she kept the truth locked inside. Her secret, the ledger, the murder she had witnessed, couldn't leave her lips. Not now. Not here. Silas moved to the corner and pulled a chair closer to the window. He rested his forearms on it, leaning slightly forward, eyes scanning the woods. "You can't stay hidden forever," he said. "Eventually, someone's going to come looking for you. And when they do, we need a plan." Lydia swallowed hard, nodding, but she said nothing. She didn't dare. The wrong word, the wrong glance, and everything could come crashing down. The weight of her secret pressed against her chest, a constant, throbbing reminder that her safety, and his, depended on silence. For a moment, the cabin was still. Only the wind outside whispered through the trees, carrying the distant creak of a wagon and the faint clatter of town life far away. The shadow by the woods didn't move. Whoever it was, they were patient. They waited for a slip, a mistake, a sign of weakness. Silas finally broke the quiet. "You need rest. Eat something." He pushed a tin of dried meat and a crust of bread across the table. She hesitated, then took them, hands trembling. Every movement was careful, measured. Every breath was a battle against the panic clawing at her. "Why help me?" she asked quietly, almost a whisper. Silas's eyes didn't waver from the window. "Because someone has to." His voice was simple, firm. No explanation needed beyond that. Outside, the figure in the shadows retreated slightly, then melted back into the trees. It was enough to remind them both: the chase wasn't over. The danger was still out there. Every second Lydia remained in Blackwater Flats was another second that could end badly, for her, for him, for anyone caught in between. She ate slowly, glancing occasionally at Silas. Trust was a fragile thing, she realized. She had to rely on him, even while guarding her secret. And Silas, in turn, had to read between the lines of her fear and hesitation, knowing that what she wasn't saying might be far more dangerous than anything he could see. The cabin door creaked once, carried by the wind. Lydia flinched. Silas didn't move. Outside, Blackwater Flats waited, sun dipping lower behind the distant hills, shadows lengthening. Somewhere out there, their pursuers were regrouping, plotting. And somewhere, buried in silence, the first hints of a larger danger stirred, ready to pull them both into a storm neither could yet imagine. Days passed in uneasy silence. Lydia moved quietly through Silas's cabin, performing small tasks, sweeping, fetching water, tending the hearth, but every action was measured, deliberate. She never strayed from the cabin for long, always glancing toward the door, toward the tree lean beyond, as if expecting the masked gunman to appear at any moment. Silas watched her with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that fear could be measured by its details. The way her eyes followed each creak of the old floorboards. The way she adjusted a chair or moved a dish, always careful, always alert. Something about her knowledge of her surroundings was unusual, not just street smart, but observant in a way that hinted at understanding people she had never met. It started with small things. A bark from the sheriff's dog across town, and Lydia would flinch as if she recognized it. A passing rider would catch her gaze, and she would duck, shrinking into the shadows, moving silently. Silas noted it without comment. "You know your way around town better than you let on," he said one evening, sitting across from her by the fire. The flames flickered across his lined face, casting shadows that made him appear almost carved from the night itself. Lydia looked down at her hands, twisting a strand of hair around her finger. I've lived here long enough to notice things. Things about people. About routines." She paused, then added, "I watch, that's all." Silas's eyes narrowed not in accusation, but in thought. Her eyes avoided his now, focused on the fire, on some private calculation. She was keeping more than just her fear inside. She was hiding knowledge, details that could change everything. Outside, the town stirred. Blackwater Flats had a rhythm, a pulse that Silas knew well. Market days brought merchants and gossipers, the saloon echoed with piano notes and laughter, the clink of glasses masking whispers of debts and betrayals. Yet even from the cabin's edge, they could see shadows moving through the streets, figures watching, checking windows, walking in patterns that suggested reconnaissance rather than leisure. One evening, Lydia startled as a horse whinnied in the distance. She leaned against the doorframe, eyes scanning the horizon. Silas noticed her fingers brushing against the inside of her coat, resting on something hidden. He didn't speak immediately, waiting to see if she would react further. "You seem familiar with the sheriff's habits," he said finally, careful, almost casual. "You know when he patrols, what time he leaves his office, even when he's likely to be alone." Her gaze shot up to his, and for a moment, the firelight caught a flicker of something sharp in her eyes. She stepped back, shaking her head. I've seen him around. That's all. Just seen." Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He didn't press yet, patience was part of survival. But the pieces were forming, like shards of a broken mirror. The fear in her voice didn't match the knowledge she displayed. She wasn't just running from debt collectors. She was running from someone, or something, bigger. Someone who knew the town, the law, and the people inside it. The wind picked up outside, rattling the cabin windows. Silas noticed a subtle shift in Lydia's stance, a readiness, almost as if she expected someone to appear from the trees. "I need to know what I'm protecting," he said softly. "I need to know why they're after you." Lydia's fingers tightened around the table edge, knuckles white. She swallowed hard. I can't tell you everything," she admitted. "Not yet. It's not safe. If I say too much, it could put both of us in danger." Silas nodded slowly, understanding the weight of unspoken truths. Trust was fragile, and she had none to give him yet. But he also knew something unspoken: the danger chasing her was more than debt. More than ordinary greed. He could feel it in the way her eyes flickered to the horizon, in the way her hands brushed against the hidden object beneath her coat. The night deepened, and shadows lengthened across the cabin walls. Somewhere outside, the faint crunch of hooves against dirt and the scrape of boots on planks reminded them that the chase had not ended. The gunmen were methodical, gathering information, testing defenses, and Lydia's quiet knowledge of the town hinted that she had seen more than she admitted. Silas realized, then, that the path ahead was far from simple. Each day would demand caution, strategy, and trust they were only beginning to understand. And each night, the question lingered, could they survive the hidden enemy watching, waiting, and ready to strike? The night was heavy, thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. Inside the cabin, Silas stirred from a restless doze, senses prickling. Something wasn't right. The wind outside carried no ordinary whisper tonight, there was a rhythm to it, deliberate, like the soft tread of someone circling, calculating, waiting. Lydia sat at the small table, hands pressed against the worn wood, eyes wide and alert. She had been quiet for hours, listening. Every sound outside, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the groan of a shutter in the wind, made her flinch. She didn't move when Silas rose, revolver in hand, checking the door. She didn't need to. He already knew she was ready. The first shot cracked the night like a whip. Wood splintered near the window, sending shards across the floor. Lydia reacted instantly, ducking low and rolling toward the side of the cabin. Silas's revolver barked twice, but the attackers didn't retreat. They were organized and coordinated. Not ordinary gunmen. Lydia's hands moved with surprising speed, grabbing a heavy cast-iron pan from the shelf. When the second shot came, she swung it with precision, knocking a rifle from the hand of one masked figure as he leaned into the room. Silas blinked, momentarily stunned. She wasn't just running blind, she could fight. She could defend herself. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, voice sharp as he reloaded. She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes flicked to the small window at the back, calculating. Every movement was deliberate. Every glance measured the distance, the angles, the threat. Silas realized in that moment that she knew more than she was letting on, more than just the basic skills needed to survive. The gunman pressed closer, peering into the cabin, rifles trained. Splinters flew as another bullet hit the doorframe. Silas and Lydia moved in tandem, a silent rhythm of survival. She tossed a chair to block one entry point, then another, while he kept the attackers pinned with precise shots. It became clear, this wasn't a random attack. They knew where she was. They knew she was hiding evidence, and they were determined to retrieve it at any cost. Silas's cautious mind raced. The ledger she carried, the secret she hadn't spoken of, was bigger than either of them had imagined. The men weren't just after a woman. They were after a story someone powerful wanted buried. A window shattered. One gunman lunged through, only to be met by Lydia, who swung the pan with a force that knocked him to the floor. She grabbed a knife from the table and faced the remaining intruders, her stance steady, her eyes cold. Silas took a deep breath, realizing he could trust her skill, if not yet her story. Finally, the last attacker retreated, dragging the injured man with him. Silence fell over the cabin. Only the wind and the faint, rapid beat of their hearts filled the air. Splinters of wood and overturned furniture littered the floor. Both of them leaned against the wall, breathing hard, adrenaline still sharp in their veins. Silas studied Lydia, then really looked at her. She wasn't just a frightened girl fleeing debt collectors. She was a survivor, a strategist, someone who understood the stakes without needing to speak them aloud. The realization settled heavily, whatever secret she held was dangerous, far beyond the ordinary threats of Blackwater Flats. "You didn't tell me everything," Silas said finally, voice low, steady, though his eyes burned with a new intensity. She met his gaze for a long moment. "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet. If I do, they'll come for both of us. And it won't just be the men outside." The truth in her words settled in the cabin like smoke. Corruption, hidden and deep, reached further than either could see. The danger was not confined to the streets, they were entangled in something bigger, something that could destroy anyone who dared to uncover it. Outside, the wind carried a soft scrape along the roof, a reminder that the night was not yet over. Silas tightened his grip on his revolver. He glanced at Lydia, who stood ready, silent but resolute. Whatever lay ahead, he knew they would face it together, for now, at least. And the ledger, the secret she hid, was the key. The first night of their fight was over. But the storm had only just begun. Night had swallowed Blackwater Flats, leaving only the faint glow of the moon and the distant lanterns flickering in the saloon and along the main street. Silas and Lydia moved quietly through the shadows, the forest on the outskirts stretching like a dark wall around them. The ledger, heavy with secrets, was tucked safely under Lydia's coat, pressed close to her chest. Every step carried the weight of urgency and danger. They didn't speak much. Words would only slow them, betray their positions. Silence had become a language of its own. Silas led, senses alert to every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves. He could feel eyes on them, not just in the town but from the woods beyond, where men watched and waited, hunting them like prey. "Do you know where we're going?" Lydia whispered, the first words between them in hours. "Yes," Silas replied without looking back. "A place they won't think to look. A safe spot to stay until we figure out the next move." She nodded, but tension creased her brow. Each town they passed was a trap. The ledger's pages contained names, crimes, and betrayals that reached into the homes and businesses they walked past. Even a casual glance from a neighbor could spell disaster. A hoot from an owl made them both flinch. Silas glanced at her, eyes narrowing. She flinched too, but then straightened, shoulders tense. She wasn't just afraid of being caught, she was afraid of what might happen if someone discovered the truth she carried. Hours passed as they navigated narrow trails and abandoned homesteads. At one point, they paused near a stream, the water reflecting the moon like silver broken glass. Lydia knelt to drink, keeping her eyes on the shadows, while Silas scanned the tree line. She was fast, precise, and silent, moving with a caution that spoke of training and experience. "You're skilled," he said quietly. She glanced at him, a hint of a smile flickering, quickly replaced by seriousness. "I have to be. The ledger isn't just paper, it's a target. If anyone sees it," her voice trailed off, leaving the weight of her words hanging in the night air. Silas nodded, understanding. He didn't need details. He just needed to know that every step they took carried consequences far beyond themselves. The ledger wasn't just evidence, it was power, dangerous power, and they were walking through the crossfire. They pressed on, moving through the trees like shadows themselves. Each town they skirted, each farmhouse they avoided, was a reminder that nowhere was truly safe. Even people they thought trustworthy could be betrayers, bribed, or silenced. Every encounter carried risk, a passing rider, a barking dog, a window shutter creaking in the wind. By dawn, they reached a small clearing far from the main roads. Silas motioned for Lydia to wait while he scouted ahead. He returned moments later, nodding. "This will work. A cabin abandoned long ago. No one comes here anymore." They entered cautiously. Dust coated every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of old wood and decay. But it was shelter, and for now, that was enough. Lydia dropped to the floor, relieved, pressing the ledger closer. Her eyes met Silas's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, the first measure of trust was forming. Outside, the wind carried distant voices and the faint sound of hoofbeats. The gunmen hadn't stopped. They never would, not until they had what they wanted, or until someone stopped them. Silas and Lydia exchanged a glance, each knowing the stakes had only grown. Every day, every hour, the danger intensified, and the web of suspicion expanded. But within the cabin, for the first time in days, there was a moment of quiet. They had survived the night, evaded immediate capture, and for now, the ledger remained hidden. It was a fragile piece, but it was enough to plan their next move. Silas leaned against the wall, eyes on the floorboards. "We keep moving," he said finally. "We can't stay in one place too long. But we'll make sure it's worth it. Every step we take is for keeping that ledger safe, and for keeping you alive." Lydia nodded, though fatigue weighed heavily on her shoulders. She knew he didn't fully trust her yet, but she could feel the shift. Survival depended on partnership now, even if the truth she carried remained unspoken. Outside, the forest held its breath. Somewhere in the darkness, the pursuers pressed closer. And Silas and Lydia, bound by necessity and growing trust, prepared for the journey that would test them in ways neither could yet imagine. The cabin lay quiet beneath a sky streaked with the first light of dawn. Silas sat near the hearth, sharpening his revolver and listening to the wind whisper through the trees. The night's escape had left both of them exhausted, but the ledger's presence weighed heavily than fatigue. Every page, every name, every secret it contained was a threat waiting to be unleashed. Lydia sat across from him, hands pressed tightly over the bundle hidden beneath her coat. Her eyes were shadowed, thoughtful, and for the first time, she seemed ready to speak. Her fingers trembled slightly as she brushed a strand of hair from her face. Silas noticed, leaning back and watching her carefully, waiting. He knew the moment had come when half-truths would no longer suffice. "I need to tell you," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "Everything." Silas didn't move, didn't speak. His eyes never left hers. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken understanding. The truth could be deadly. But it was also inevitable. She drew the ledger from beneath her coat and placed it on the table. Its cover was worn, edges frayed, but it carried power beyond its fragile appearance. Silas leaned forward, studying the bundle without touching it, letting her dictate the pace. "This ledger," she said, voice trembling, "it holds names. People responsible for the sheriff's murder." Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back. People in town, powerful people, men and women who would kill to keep it hidden. Silas's jaw tightened. He had suspected danger, but this was more than he had imagined. The men chasing her weren't just bounty hunters or debt collectors, they were hired killers, enforcers, and the ledger's owners were deeply embedded in the town's power. "I saw it happen," Lydia continued, swallowing hard. "The sheriff, he was killed. I witnessed it. I thought no one would believe me if I spoke. But I wrote it all down. Every name, every detail, hoping someone would stop it." Silas ran a hand through his hair, a slow exhale escaping him. "And that's why they're after you. Not just for money, not just for revenge. They want to erase everything you know." She nodded, eyes glistening. "If I tell the wrong person, if I reveal the ledger too soon, it won't just be me. It'll be both of us. Everyone I trust could be an enemy." Silas's eyes softened slightly, though the weight of responsibility pressed down. Trust had always been fragile in his line of work, and now it was tested to its limit. "Then we plan carefully. We move deliberately. We don't give them a chance." Outside, a distant noise, a creak of a tree branch, the faint echo of boots, reminded them that time was running thin. The enemies who had pursued her before were still out there, methodical and relentless. Each passing hour increased the danger, and now, with the ledger revealed, every step carried more risk. Lydia leaned back, her hands resting on the table near the ledger. "I didn't want to involve you," she said softly. "But I had no choice. You saved me. And now, I trust you to protect it. To protect both of us." Silas studied her for a long moment. He saw the truth in her eyes, the fear, yes, but also the determination. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't naive. And she wasn't lying about the stakes. The ledger was more than paper, it was a weapon, a key to exposing corruption that ran deeper than anyone could imagine. Finally, he nodded. "We confront this together. But we need a plan. Every move we make from here on out will determine whether we survive." One mistake, and it's over. Lydia's lips pressed together, and she nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. The night of hiding, the weeks of evasion, the small victories, they all led to this moment. The truth was out. The ledger was real. And now, they had to face the storm it would bring. The wind shifted outside, carrying the scent of earth and pine. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied, a faint signal that their pursuers were moving again. Silas and Lydia exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. The confrontation was coming, and there was no turning back. The ledger had revealed the danger. And now, they would have to meet it head-on. The town hall of Blackwater Flats loomed ahead, dark and silent under the dim glow of lanterns swaying in the cold night breeze. Silas and Lydia crept through the shadows, the weight of the ledger pressing against her chest. Every step was deliberate, every movement measured. They had no margin for error. Tonight, the secrets would either be exposed, or buried forever. Inside, the grand hall smelled of polished wood and dust, an empty chamber that had once echoed with debates, announcements, and the shuffle of townsfolk. Now, only shadows moved across the walls, cast by flickering lanterns as men hurried to destroy evidence. Powerful leaders of the town, faces familiar yet hardened by corruption, rifled through papers and locked cabinets. Each name in Lydia's ledger had a target, and each target moved recklessly, believing no one could stop them. Lydia swallowed hard, her pulse hammering. "We need to be careful," she whispered. Silas's hand rested on the grip of his revolver. Careful, yes. But deliberate. They won't expect anyone to challenge them tonight. The first shot came without warning. Silas fired, the report echoing through the hall. A figure dropped, and chaos erupted. Lanterns swung violently, spilling light and shadow across the polished floor. Lydia ducked behind a table, throwing chairs to block the line of fire. Her hands shook at first, but then determination set in. She moved with purpose, flinging overturned chairs to slow the attackers, protecting the ledger as if her life depended on it, because it did. Silas advanced steadily, taking cover behind a podium, eyes sharp for every movement. He fired again, precise, controlled. The gunmen faltered, confused by the sudden resistance. They hadn't anticipated anyone daring to challenge the power they wielded, to risk life and limb to expose them. Lydia's breath came in quick bursts, but she didn't hesitate. She moved to the center of the hall, placing the ledger on a long table and flipping it open. Lantern light reflected off the pages, illuminating names, dates, and the crimes committed by those who thought themselves untouchable. Shouts and curses erupted around her as the leaders realized their secrets were no longer hidden. "Stop them," one shouted, but it was too late. The ledger was out in the open. The evidence was undeniable. Silas fired another warning shot, his voice commanding as he stepped beside Lydia. "No one moves. The ledger stays. You all answer for this." Panic rippled through the corrupt leaders. They had relied on fear, on shadows, on silence. Now, with the truth exposed, their authority crumbled. Some bolted toward the exits, while others froze, too shocked to act. Lydia's eyes met Silas's, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged in danger. She had trusted him with the ledger, with her life, and now he was protecting both. Together, they had become more than fugitives, they had become instruments of justice in a town long ruled by corruption. Gunfire rang out sporadically, but the element of surprise was theirs. The ledger's revelations left the leaders vulnerable, and townsfolk who had long lived in quiet fear began to emerge from hiding, witnessing the confrontation. Some grabbed ropes, others raised their voices, and slowly, the balance of power shifted. By the time the sun began to rise over the horizon, the gunmen were defeated, some fleeing, others captured. The corrupt leaders had been arrested, led away in chains as their schemes unraveled before the eyes of the town. The ledger, still open on the table, stood as proof that courage and truth could topple even the most entrenched power. Silas and Lydia stepped outside into the morning light, the cool wind brushing against their faces. The town was quiet now, peaceful in the aftermath, yet forever changed. Lydia clutched the ledger close for a final moment, then handed it over to the authorities, ensuring the truth would endure. They exchanged a glance, wordless but full of understanding. Paths that had crossed in desperation now parted in respect. Silas had gained more than the satisfaction of justice, he had witnessed courage and resilience. Lydia had gained freedom, not just from the gunmen, but from the shadows that had threatened to consume her life. And though they would walk separate roads from this day forward, each carried the memory of the night that had changed Blackwater Flats forever. The sun climbed higher over Blackwater Flats, casting golden light across streets that had seen fear and corruption, and now, tentative hope. Silas stood on the outskirts of town, the dust of the past nights clinging to his boots. His eyes scanned the familiar buildings, now quiet after the chaos, and for a moment, he allowed himself to breathe. The fight was over, but the weight of it lingered. Lydia emerged from the town hall, the ledger now safely in the hands of those who would see justice done. She moved with a grace born of hardship, her steps lighter than they had been in weeks. Her face bore traces of the struggle, the tension, the fear, but also something new, relief. Freedom had a taste she had almost forgotten. She spotted Silas waiting among the long shadows of the late morning. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. The trust, the danger, the nights spent hiding and running, the confrontations, all had woven a bond deeper than simple friendship. Respect, courage, and shared survival had replaced suspicion. "You did more than survive," Silas said finally, voice low, carrying across the dusty street. "You fought, you protected that ledger, and you saw this through." Lydia offered a small, tired smile. "I couldn't have done it without you." She hesitated, glancing down the street, then back to him. "You saved me, Silas. More than once. And not just from them, from losing myself." He nodded, eyes steady, reflecting a quiet pride. "And you reminded me that even a man like me can still step into the right fight. That it's worth the risk." For a moment, the wind stirred, carrying with it the distant echo of the town's recovery, the clatter of boots as townsfolk repaired doors, the soft murmur of voices once silenced by fear. Blackwater Flats had changed overnight, its hidden corruption revealed, its shadows cleared. And while the town would never be perfect, it was now a place where truth had a chance to thrive. Lydia clutched her coat around her, feeling the ledger's weight gone from her shoulders. The danger was no longer immediate, but the memory of the past days lingered, a reminder of what she had endured and overcome. She looked at Silas, eyes bright with unspoken gratitude and the quiet acknowledgement of a connection forged in fire. "I suppose this is where we part ways," she said softly, though her voice carried the weight of farewell. Silas gave a slow nod, his jaw tightening with unspoken emotion. "Yes. Our paths led here for a reason, but they lead away now. You've got a life to reclaim, a future to build. I've got mine, and a town that won't forget what happened." She stepped closer, hesitating just a moment, then extended her hand. Silas grasped it firmly. The gesture spoke volumes, more than words ever could, trust earned, respect given, and a bond that would endure in memory if not in proximity. "Be careful, Lydia," he said quietly. "And don't let fear rule your steps again. You've faced far more than most ever will." "I won't," she replied, voice resolute. "I've survived worse than fear. And I've learned who I can trust, and who I can't. And I know this, even if we never meet again, you made a difference. You saved more than me. You saved the truth." Silas released her hand and took a step back, letting her move forward. Lydia turned, walking down the sunlit street, the dust of the frontier rising gently at her boots. Behind her, Silas watched, quiet, resolute, carrying the memory of the nights they had survived together, the danger they had faced, and the courage she had shown. The town began to hum with life again, the past confronted, the future uncertain but free. Silas tipped his hat to the rising sun and turned toward the horizon, ready to resume his path as a lone guardian of the West. Lydia disappeared into the awakening town, carrying freedom, courage, and the hope that even in the darkest times, truth could prevail. And somewhere between the dust and the dawn, the story of two survivors, one protector, one witness, remained, a quiet legend in the heart of Blackwater Flats, forever changing the course of their lives, forever bound by danger, trust, and the enduring strength of courage. If you loved Lydia and Silas's story, hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling Wild West adventures. Don't miss the next tale of courage, danger, and unexpected heroes.